All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. First of all, a special thank you to Jonas and Kaplan for sponsoring the Mazonos today. Shabbos, we thank all of our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors, for the month of Iyar, Yona and Shushie Ehrenfeld. In loving memory and l'zecher nishmas, their grandfather Yosef and Shmuel Aron, Benjamin and Elys Wohl of Netanya, Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating the shiurim this month in memory of their dear friend and mentor Moshe Chaim ben Tzvi Hirsch. Our week of learning sponsors, Dr. Shmuel and Rabin Karabkin, in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of Shmuel's father, Lipa ben Yecheskel HaKohen, Zichron L'Bracha. Shmuel is actually now in Eretz Yisrael, I believe. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a neshama. We also thank our Daf Yomi sponsors today, the Chaver family, for dedicating the shir in the zechus of an aliyah for the neshama of Rabbi Meir Balanes, whose yahrzeit is today on Pesach Sheni, and Le'ilui Nishmas Mordechai ben Jalal. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, first of all, Halavai, Rabbi Meir Balanes should be a Elys Yosef for all of Klal Yisrael, in Meretz Hashem, and in times of tzara, in times of difficulty, may his zechus continue to guide us and protect us. And we hope that in Meretz Hashem, all the neshamas have an aliyah and the family has a neshama. And we thank again the Chaver family for their sponsorship. Rabbi, with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Samech Tes. Thank you to Rabbi Kalman Akiva for giving the shir yesterday. Hopefully you did your homework. We are picking up on Samech Tes Amud Aleph 69a, and we are picking up 2, 4, 6, 7 lines down from the top. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says Ve'ima. So continuing in our discussion yesterday, which is really based on the Mishnah that we saw on Samech Zayin Amud Beis. Again, the continued discussion as to pretty much what disqualifies a woman from the ability to consume truma. And remember, again, we're consistently dealing with two different types of cases, and there's a little bit of a tension. Just to frame this, and then we'll jump back into this. The Gemara says, according to Mishnah already, we saw one typical case is where a Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen. In which case, which is very interesting, her ability to continue to teach truma is based on what? Based on what? Her continued connection in some way to her Kohanic husband. Now, as we've established, that connection is really established how? Or as we've right? It's for children. On the flip side, interestingly enough, if a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael and then the marriage dissolves, her ability to eat truma is dependent on what? Her ability to go back to her, quote unquote, to her father's home, which means the absence of offspring from her Yisrael husband. So you have this interesting tension. So the Gemara says, Ve'ima, Mi sheyesh la amanos v'gerushin ba, ki les le zera ka'achla, ki is le zera la'achla. Why don't we say the following? Why don't we say anyone, right, any type of marriage that ultimately, again, can create an almana or a grusha, when ultimately, again, there are no children, ki les le zera ka'achla, she has the ability to continue to eat. Ki is le zera, but where there are children, lo achla. Misha ein la almanos v'gerushin ba, but in a situation where there can be no almanos v'gerushin. In other words, in a situation where there's no formative marriage, that's actually going to be the topic of our next Mishnah. Afagav de'isle zara nami teichol. Even if there is children, she should still continue to be able to eat truma. To which the Gemara says, Im kain ribuye Levia Yisraelis Lamali. If that's the case, ultimately, again, why did we have to come to include the case of Levia and Yisraelis? Rabbi Akiva the Amar, Ein Kiddushin Tov Sim Mechayve Lavin. And according to Rabbi Akiva, who generally says that Kiddush is not Tov Sim Mechayve Lavin, I will say, remember again, this is an ongoing discussion that we've seen throughout this Masechta. Rabbi Akiva is a minority opinion. Everyone, when I say everyone, I mean everyone else besides Rabbi Akiva holds that Allah Chalamayse Kiddushin Tov Sim B'Chayve Lavin. So a Kohen marries a grusha, or a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, or Yisrael is machzir grusha, so remarries his divorcee. All of these are situations that are punishable by Allah; they're prohibited. But Allah Chalamayse, according to everyone except Rabbi Akiva, if you do marry such a woman, the Kiddushin works. Rabbi Akiva is the sole opinion who holds that Kiddushin ein tovsim b'chayve lavin. So the Gemara is according to Rabbi Akiva, Damar ein Kiddushin tovsim b'chayve lavin, my kisihya leish zar. Why does the pasuk say, if she will marry an ish zar, kiti boil? It should say not kisihya, but rather ultimately, again, because according to Rabbi Akiva, so according to the Gemara, sihya, A lashon of havia is a lashon of marriage. According to Rabbi Akiva, marriage does not work in these circumstances. So why doesn't it just say kisi boil? Because bia would be the disqualifier. So the Gemara says amana ugrusha lamali. And furthermore, again, why do I need the phrase amana and grusha? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Amana lahachmir aleha, grusha lahakel aleha. Amana is to be machmir, grusha is to be mekel. What does this mean? I'll say, take a look at Rashi. It's Rashi a little bit further down in the daf. It's actually Rashi right across from Tosas ushnehem. Go right across. Amana lahachmir kilomar lav lemi ute mish yeshla amanas v'gerishin ela legufei itztrich. Amana kedei lahachmir aleha. Listen to this. De'ilo kasiv, had the Torah not said almana, havamina amanas yisrael v'hi bas kohen techol. See, I will say, I would have thought as follows. Had the Torah not said almana, I would have thought an almanas Yisrael. So this is the case of a bas kohen who marries a Yisrael. Bas kohen who marries a Yisrael, now her husband dies. So I would have thought that she is permitted to once again resume eating truma, even though what? Afagav di isle zara, even though she has children. In other words, I would not have known that the presence or the existence of children from a Yisrael husband would preclude the Bas Kohen from continuing to eat Truma. Furthermore, again, so we'll say, therefore, the Pasuk comes along and teaches me, Amana, teaches me that halacha l'maisa, if a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael, and then she is widowed, she is permitted to resume eating Truma. As long as what? As long as what? There are no children with her Yisrael husband. That's what it means, lahachmir. Halachmir means, and if there are children, she cannot resume eating truma. Conversely, grusha lahakel aleha. Continuing that Rashi, grusha itzrich lemichtavei rachman lahakel aleha ulameimar dechi niskarsha mi Yisrael lahakel dechi les leizara mi Yisrael techol dilo kasi havamina afagav de les leizara lo techol kevan de ifsala mikuna mitrumanam ifsal. So also we're going to see in just a moment, grushas to be mekel. See, here's what's fascinating. You might have thought that when a Bas Kohen is divorced from a Yisrael, whether she has children or not, right, she should not be able to eat truma. Now, why would you make such a limud like that? Because also, if you think about it, once a woman is a divorcee, she's already disqualified from the kahuna. Right? Now, I would have thought that profound and systemic disqualification from marriage into the kahuna also precludes her from eating truma, whether she has children or not. Kamash Malan, once again, Abosai, children, offspring are always the determinant. So essentially, whenever you have a situation of a Bas Kohen who marries a Yisrael, when that marriage ends, or not when, if that marriage ends, either by death or divorce, so she's an Amana, she's a Grusha, the determinant for whether or not she could go back to her father's home and eat Truma is offspring, children. Everything comes down to children. To which the Gemara says, Utsricha, you need both of them. I'll tell you why. Here we go. If the Torah would have just taught me Amana and taught me that if a woman is divorced, the Bas Kohen is divorced from a Yisrael husband and she doesn't have offspring, that she can now continue to eat Truma, I would have said, Amanahu dichiles leizara achla. It's only the case of Amana where if she doesn't have children, she's permitted to go and eat. I should say, she's continuing. We'll say, the lashon is, she's permitted to go back to her father's home and eat truma. Just to be clear, the halacha doesn't actually necessitate her return to her father's home, but rather the way we categorize her state is that after she is divorced from her Yisrael husband, her state of being is a return to her father's home. So I might have thought like this. I would have thought like this: an almana, when she does not have children, is permitted to go ahead and resume eating truma in her father's home. Why? Because technically speaking, an almana is permitted to marry into the kahuna. Now, both say, you'll say to yourself, is that a totally true statement? Right? No, who can she marry? Kohen Gadol. We don't look at that. Otherwise, I will say the Kohen Gadol is one guy. That we don't judge her eligibility for the kahuna based on the Kohen Gadol. But Grusha, what I both say, by dint of being a divorcee, she is never permitted to ever again marry a Kohen. I might have thought that even if she doesn't have children, she can't eat truma. So therefore, we need the case of grusha, v'yashwein grusha, and if we would have just said grusha hidechi islei zara la'achla mishum delachazi lakuna, I'm gonna have thought like this. It's only in the case of grusha where she does have children that she is precluded from eating truma. Perhaps that's because of her own personal status, that she can't marry a Kohen. Aval almana dechazi lakuna. But I might have thought that maybe an almana, even if she does have children from the Yisrael husband, she should still be permitted to go back and resume eating truma. Why? Because she herself is eligible to go ahead and marry a Kohen. Therefore, Shabbos says, therefore again, halacha l'maisa, both statements or both words, amona and grusha, are necessary. And Abba says this is very important. So the bottom line, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara is teaching us is that when the Torah says amona or grusha, it means that if a bas Kohen is married to a Yisrael and that marriage ends either through death or divorce, we have one simple shaila: is the bas Kohen now eligible to go back to her father's home, metaphoric, quote unquote, and resume eating truma? And the answer to that question is, right, yes, as long as there are no children. That's it. And again, the Gemara just went through the exercise of why we need to say both, and we couldn't learn one out from the other. Beautiful. So it says the Gemara, ve'ema nivala lepasula. So why don't we say, during the Brisa said before that if she was nivala lepasula, she had bia with someone who's puzzled to her, af machzir grushaso. Maybe that even includes a case, in other words, maybe even only becomes ineligible for truma consumption when she has relations with a man who is puzzled to her. Maybe that even includes machzir grushaso. Right? You can remember the case of machzir grushaso is a very simple case. Reuven's married to Rachel. They get divorced, right? So Rachel then goes ahead and marries Shimon. They get divorced. The prohibition of machzir grushaso is that Reuven cannot remarry Rachel. To be clear, if a man divorces his wife and she has not yet married someone else, they are permitted to get remarried. The prohibition of machzir grushaso is only once she goes ahead and marries someone else, then that's the prohibition. So maybe machzir grushaso, if a woman has relations with her ex-husband, with her first ex-husband, we'll call it, right? So Rachel has relations with Reuven. After she divorced Reuven, divorced Shimon, now she's back with Reuven. Maybe that should invalidate her to eat truma as well. To which the Gemara says very interestingly, Ish zar amarachmana. Torah says who invalidates her? Ish zar. Mi shezar etzla meikara lafuki haydelo zar etzla meikaru. But it's very interesting. The only person who goes ahead and invalidates her is an Ish zar, a quote unquote a strange man. This Reuven is not an Ish zar. Why is Reuven not an Ish zar? She was married to him. Interesting technicality. Ihachi chalal delav zarhu meikar lifsal. So I will say ultimately again. So then why don't we say the same case? Why don't we say halacha ma'aseh if she has relations with a chalal? Why don't we say also he's also not a zar, and therefore perhaps again he should not pass. Amrikra lo yichalel zaro ba'amov. Makish zar lo. So we'll say the pasuk says he shall not profane his offspring. Makish zar lo. The Torah compares the offspring to the man himself. Mahu posel, av zaro nami posel. Ultimately, again, just as he invalidates, so to his offspring will invalidate as well. Ve'ima mishas havia. I will say furthermore, why don't we say like this? Why don't we say that halacha l'maisa, since the Torah uses the lashon of sihia, which is the lashon of kiddushin, perhaps the woman should become invalidated from truma consumption ultimately from the time of marriage, even before there's a bia, right? Just from kiddushin, to which the Gemara says, "Ve'ema mishas havia dumya the kohen gadol," because we compare it to a kohen gadol. What's the case of the kohen gadol? So ma kohen gadol ba'amana bebia av hainami bebia. Just like the kohen gadol only invalidates the amana with bia, so to again here kiddushin by itself or a marriage by itself is not enough. There has to be a bia. Ve'ema ad ika havia ubia. So maybe there has to be marriage and bia, to which the Gemara says, Dumiyat kohen gadol ba'almana. Once again, about say kohen gadol and almana serves as the paradigm. Ma kohen gadol ba'almana bebia l'chuda. Just like by kohen gadol and the almana, bia is enough. Af hainame bebia l'chuda. So too over here, bia has the ability to invalidate this woman from truma consumption even without kiddushin. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol shezaro pasel posel, v'chol she'in zaro pasel eno posel. So I will say the Mishnah Rabbi Yossi came along and said an interesting klal. He said any situation Shezaro pasal. Any union where the offspring is going to be pasal, such a man will also invalidate a woman from truma consumption. Okay, so the Gemara says, "My ika bein Tanakama Rabbi Yossi." Rabbi Yossi sounds like Rabbi Yossi is kind of saying the same exact thing as the Tanakama. So wherein lies the distinction between these opinions? This is fascinating, Rabbi Yossi. Listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan, Mitzri Sheni va'adomi Sheni ika benayhu. Wow. Rabbi Yossi, the halacha is that a Mitzri, an Egyptian, or an Edomite who convert, Rabbi Yossi, halacha l'maisa, their conversion is valid, but they are not permitted to marry into the mainstream Jewish population up until the third generation, which means they can marry other converts or things like that, but they can't marry what we'll call a regular Jewish person, so to speak. When I say regular Jewish person, I mean a person who has been Jewish for multiple generations with no issues in terms of yichus. That's the limitation. Also, I'll point out by today, you understand all of these halachas don't apply contemporarily. In other words, if a person from Egypt comes along and wants to convert to today, we don't look at them as a Mitzri convert, right? Halacha l'maisa that doesn't, because again, remember, Sancheriv already came along and was Mabalbel. He already mixed up all of the nations. In any event, so the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, listen to this. So, Ushneim Olam Duam Elami Kohen Gadol Ba'amana. Here we go. Tanakama Savar, Ma Kohen Gadol Ba'amana Shebi Asa Ba'averu Posel, Af Hai Nami Posel. So we'll say, listen to this. So first of all, take a look at Rashi, but just before we go, look at Rashi. Second wide line in Rashi. Mitzri Sheni, Pasal Vizaro Kashal Tanakama, Kevan Duhu Pasal, Posla Babiyada Rabbi Yossi, Lo Pasal. So we'll say, listen to this. The Gemara is going to suggest the distinction between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama ultimately, again, is in the case of Mitzri Sheni. So I will say Mitzri Sheni, just to be clear. So Mitzri Sheni is a second generation Mitzri convert. So just to illustrate this, right? Mitzri 1, right? We'll just call him Mitzri Guy. He converted, right? He's generation 1. He then has children. That's Mitzri Sheni. Okay, so that's what we're talking about over here. Mitzri Sheni, Pasal. Now I will say a Mitzri Sheni himself is a Pasal. Pasal in that he's not permitted to marry into the general pool. But when Mitzri Sheni has a kid, what's the status of his kid? Good to go. Totally good to go. To which the Gemara says like this. So here we go. Go back to the Gemara. So Tanakama Savar, Ma Kohen Gadol Ba'amana Shebiasa Ba'averu Posel, Af Hainami Posel. Tanakama says, Rabbi say, we look at the man in the equation when determining whether or not the particular bia will invalidate a woman from future truma consumption. We look at one thing, the nature of the man with whom she is engaging in the act of relations. So when an almana has relations with a kohen gadol, so the Lamaisa again, he's pasal, right? He pasals her. At the end of the day, this is a forbidden bia, and therefore halacha Lamaisa, she becomes unable to eat truma after this bia. Okay, Rabbi Yosef, and therefore I will say, what would we say about a Mitzri Sheni? What would Tanakama say about a Mitzri Sheni? Right? Same thing. Right? Not allowed to have relations with a Mitzri Sheni. He's not allowed to marry into the general pool. So it's just like the case of a Kohen Gadol with an Amana. Therefore, bia with a Mitzri Sheni would preclude her from future truma consumption. Rabbi Yossi Savrik Kohen Gadol, listen to this. Rabbi Yossi says, it's like the case of a Kohen Gadol marries an Amana. Ma Kohen Gadol shezaro pasal uposel, af kol shezaro pasal posel. Listen to this. Rabbi Yossi says, yeah, it's just like the case of Kohen Gadol and Amana. Rabbi say, what's unique about the case of Kohen Gadol and Amana? Not only is the Kohen Gadol not permitted to marry an Amana, and the bia is usher, but what else happens? The offspring from that union. Rabbi say, what happens if they have a child? What's the status of the child? Chalal. Child's a chalal. So that Rabbi Yossi says, that's the paradigm. That's the paradigm. Whenever you have an act of relations which would create invalid offspring, is when the act of relations itself invalidates the woman from future truma consumption. I will say, what does that come to include? Exclude, Lafuke Mitzri Sheni de'ein pasal. D'chsev banim asher yivadu lahem dar shlishi yavo lahem bakal Hashem. So I will say, listen to this. But so in a Mitzri Sheni, I will say, listen to this. A woman has relations with a Mitzri Sheni. So here's what's interesting. If they have a child, what's the status of that child? Kosher, totally fine. So I will say, according to Rabbi Yossi, such a bia, even though this bia with the Mitzri Sheni is not a sanctioned bia, right? Halacha l'maisa would not invalidate her from eating truma. It's fascinating. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, according to Rabbi Yossi, the only type of bia that invalidates someone from eating truma is the type of bia which would create offspring, which itself is pasul. But if the offspring is totally kosher, then even though the bia is asur, ultimately, again, it doesn't invalidate her from going ahead and eating truma. So we'll say, fundamental machlok is Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi about, do we just look at the act of bia itself and say, if that's asur, then ultimately, again, she becomes invalidated from future truma consumption? Or do we measure the bia ultimately, again, through the status of the offspring? In other words, what would this bia create? If it creates offspring that is pasul, then indeed the woman is precluded as a result of the act of bia from eating truma anymore. But if the offspring is kosher, which is quite fascinating, then the bia does not invalidate her. Really fascinating. Let's go like this. Says the Gemara, Shimon Gamliel Omer, Kol sha'ata nose bito, ata nose al menuso. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, anytime that you're permitted to, a different metric here. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, if you're permitted to marry his, right, nose bito, ata nose al menuso. If you're permitted to marry his daughter, right, ultimately, again, you can marry his almana. All right, what's this? My Ika ben Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. I'll say, what's an afkamina in this case? So I'll be here between the two opinions, because it sounds like, once again, they're saying the same thing. I'll say, took a look at Rashi. Kol sha'ata, koin no sebita, ata koin no salmanoso. So we'll say, any situation where a kohen could marry someone's daughter, then another kohen could marry that person's almana. So says the Gemara, what's the nafka? I don't understand. It sounds the same case. Sounds like saying the same thing as the Tanakama. To which the Gemara, Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yosef, Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yosef Shimon Gamliel. Amar Ula, so what's the nafka between Rabbi Yosef Shimon Gamliel? Amar Ula, listen to this. Ger Amoni Umoavi Ika beinehem. And let's listen to this. The chilik is a ger, Amoni, and Moavi. Watch this. From Ammon and Moav. So Ushneim lo amdu el mi kohen gadol ba'amana. Rabbi Yossi savar ma kohen gadol ba'amana shezaro pasol uposel af kol shezaro pasol uposel. Right? So Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion. Rabbi Yossi says that halacha l'maisa, any situation where the offspring is pasol, then ultimately again the bia pasels as well. And any time where, good. Rabbi Shmuel says ma kohen gadol ba'amana kol shezaro pasol uposel. Af shekol zaro pasul posel. Rabbi says, Rabbi Shimon holds, the only time that a bia is going to pasul someone is when the bia is with someone who is under the umbrella of a comprehensive prohibition. Kol zaro pasul. But if someone, let's say, is not prohibited by a comprehensive prohibition, bia with that person will not invalidate the woman from future truma consumption. I will say, what's an example of a non-comprehensive prohibition? Listen to this. The Gemara says, La fuke amoni umoavi de'in kol zaro pasal. I will say a good example. This would be amoni umoavi. Why? Because the prohibition is not comprehensive. The Amar Mar, amoni velo amonis, moavi velo moavis. Wow. See, Rabbi said, Amoni and Moavi, fascinatingly enough, is not the example of a comprehensive prohibition. Because Rabbi said, remember again, a convert, when we say, Lo yavo Amoni u'Moavi b'kal Hashem, Rabbi say, what does that mean? Could a man from Ammon and Moab, could they convert? Yes, they can convert, but they are forever limited to a particular pool of marriage. In other words, Rabbi say, it's the same way that a mamzer, right? A mamzer doesn't have to convert. The mamzer is Jewish. Same way that a mamzer is forever confined to a particular limited marital pool, an Ammoni and Moavi could also go ahead and convert. But unlike a Mitzri, right, or Edomi, who phase out of the pool in generation 3, Ammon and Moab always remain in the limited pool. But interestingly enough, it only applies to the male members of Ammon and Moab. Incredible. But there's a good reason for that, right? Because the Sefer Chinuch brings down, he says, because at the end of the day, the Torah says explicitly, why can't Ammon and Moab, why can't they fully integrate into Klal Yisrael? Right? They did not go ahead and greet us with bread. When we were traveling, they're our cousins. They didn't greet us in the desert with bread. So the Sefer Chinuch brings down, the Gemara quotes it also, quotes from the Gemara, that it is quoted from the Gemara, that it's the derech of men to come out and greet others with bread, right? At least historically, this would have been the norm. It's not the derech for women. So therefore, the women are not held accountable from Amnamov. The women of Amnamov are not held accountable that they didn't come out and greet us with bread. And therefore, interestingly enough, the prohibition of marrying into the general pool only applies to the men of Ammon and Moab, not to the women. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is introducing something dramatically new over here, which is that halacha lamaisa, it's only the result of a bia that is part of a comprehensive prohibition that would invalidate the woman from future truma consumption. But if you halacha l'maisa have a prohibition or a man that is usher to a woman, but the nature of the isser is not comprehensive and complete, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, that would not invalidate her from truma consumption. What's an example of that? If a woman were to have relations with an Ammonite or Moabite convert, right? She's not allowed to. According to the Tanna Kama, that prohibits her from future truma consumption. But according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it would not, because the prohibition is not comprehensive. Incredible. All right, let's go weiter. I want to mention just. Sorry, just waiting for it. I meant to mention this at the beginning of the shir. It was. On Erev Shabbos, I meant to dedicate the shir. There was an officer in the Yamam unit who was killed during one of the operations in Jenin. Noam Raz, who was 47 years old and left behind 6 Yisomim. And if you read, I encourage you to read. Times of Israel had just an incredible write-up about him. And I want to say, it's very striking, because these guys, no one ever knows about them, right? Because the way these Yamam units work is it's total secrecy, right? I don't know if you saw, but by the Yevamos with torch lighting campaign, I think it was the torch lighting, they honored one of these commanders, and he came in a mask and a thing. And I would say, it's so important to recognize that each and every day in Eretz Yisrael, there are these men and are these women who operate under this veil of secrecy. We know about the soldiers that we see, right? And we know about the police officers that we see. But then there are all of these people who operate in the shadows, and no one knows what they do. No one knows the Mesiras Nefesh. And no one recognizes the incredible and overwhelming price that they and their families pay. And, we just sometimes, it's important just to take a step back and just to have an overwhelming sense of hakaras hatov. Here's a man, 47 years old, who gave his life for Am Yisrael and for Eretz Yisrael. Had he not been killed, no one would have ever known what he did day in and day out. The man spent the last 22 plus years doing this kind of stuff for Am Yisrael. No one would have ever known. Besides the fact that it's an incredible model in chesed, that sometimes what it means is, too often we need recognition for everything. There's nothing wrong with giving recognition. It's good to give recognition. It's good to recognize people for the good things that they do. But sometimes we do things for the recognition, and you see someone who is literally giving to Am Yisrael every single day, and it was the antithesis of recognition. It only worked because of the veil of secrecy. And I'll say, but how we have to dedicate ourselves. Everyone does something for Klal Yisrael. We have to figure out what it is that we do. What are we doing? What are we doing? And even those of us who are here, what is it that we do for Klal Yisrael? And how is it that we advance the agenda of Klal Yisrael in our own small way? Maybe it's through our learning, and maybe it's through our davening, and maybe it's through our chesed. But when you see stories of heroes who literally put their lives on the line for Klal Yisrael each and every day, besides the fact that it's humbling, it also reminds us, to express our profound hakaras hatov to all of those men and women who do so much for Klal Yisrael each and every day. And it behooves us to ask ourselves, what am I doing? Not for me. What am I doing for my people each and every day? We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, that the neshama of Noam Raz should have an aliyah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should comfort his almana and his yisomim and watch over them in the years to come. All right, so the Mishnah says as follows. Continuing along in our Mishnah. So the Mishnah says like this: Ha'ones v'amefata. So continuing along in this same vein. Ha'ones v'amefata. So ones is a man who violates a woman. Mefate is a man who seduces a woman. V'hashota. Now what I want to point out, all of these cases over here, onis and mefate obviously are non-marital relationships, right? So non-marital relationships, or shota. Now I will say shota is a case of a guy shota. What's a shota? Someone who lacks mental capacity, who is doing chuppah v'kiddushin. Rashi points out over here, afilu aidei chuppah v'kiddushin. So I will say, in all of these cases, lo postlin v'lo ma'achilin. I will say, in any of these cases, so I will say, let's say, a bas Kohen is seduced or a bas Kohen is violated. So we'll say that act of relations, right? And let's say the guy was a mamzer. Clearly, he's a mamzer, right? But I'm saying, let's say he's a halachic mamzer. Right? That would not invalidate her from going ahead and eating truma anymore. Right? That's one. We'll see other examples of this. But the idea being that just a stam act of relations does not go ahead and passel. Furthermore, again, I both say v'lo ma'achilin. It also wouldn't entitle a woman to go ahead and eat truma as well. Vim einon ru'uyin lavo b'Yisrael. So what's actually the truth? I take it back. Leave aside the mamzer case, because it's actually a wrong example. Listen to this. Vim einon ru'uyin b'Yisrael. However, if these men are not able to marry into Klal Yisrael, hare'elu poslin. Ultimately, again, they can invalidate her from going ahead and eating truma with this bia. Let's see the case. Kesad. Yisrael haba bas Kohen, if Yisrael has relations with a bas Kohen, right? So tochal, good. Tochal b'truma. So we'll say ultimately again, halach alamaisa, she's permitted to eat truma. Now we'll say, so again, we don't say that relations with the Yisrael preclude her from eating truma. So again, we'll say, so this is just not a marriage. Let's say a Yisrael violates a bas Kohen. So we don't say that now that act of relations makes her tethered to the Yisrael. Ultimately, she's permitted to go and eat truma. I'll say Amud Beis. Interestingly enough, Ibra lo socha truma. Now watch this. If she goes ahead and she becomes pregnant, then I will say she's not allowed to eat truma. Isn't this fascinating? Because now she's carrying the child of the Yisrael. And being pregnant with a child. I'll say, by the way, I have to tell you, this piece of Gemara is so contemporarily relevant as well. Because with all of the conversation of the potential overturning of Roe versus Wade, I will say, there's a lot to talk about. I'm thinking about doing it again Shavuos night, because it's a topic we did a couple of years ago, but it might require a revisiting. I will say, but one of the fascinating ramifications of this also is restricting abortion in cases of rape, in cases of incest, which is a very, very, very serious thing. To limit a woman's ability to access that in severe circumstances would be, even from a Judaic perspective, something incredibly difficult. But again, not our topic, but I'm just fascinated that this is coming up here. So the Gemara says, Ibra, she becomes pregnant. She was violated, she becomes pregnant. From a truma perspective, lo socha b'truma. She can't eat truma because now she's pregnant with the Yisrael's child, right? Nechtacha u'b'meha. The both say strong lashon. Nechtacha literally means the fetus becomes cut up. What it means is she miscarries. But the case is she miscarries, but has not yet expelled the fetus. So the fetus is still in her, but the pregnancy is no longer viable. Tochal. So it's actually very interesting. Halach l'maisa. Once we know already that she has miscarried and the fetus is no longer viable, ultimately, she is permitted to once again resume eating truma. Haya kohen shaba bas Yisrael. So I'll say the reverse case. Let's say it was a kohen who violated a bas Yisrael. Well, when I say violated, it could be seduced. Either case, lo socha b'truma. So we'll say relations with a kohen does not enable you to eat truma. Right? Very important. Ibra. We'll say if she became pregnant, so now you have a Yisraelis who became, a bas Yisrael became pregnant by a Kohen, lo sochal. So, this is very interesting. So unlike, in the previous case, when the bas Kohen becomes pregnant from Yisrael, the pregnancy precludes her from eating truma. The reverse case of a bas Kohen who impregnates a Yisraelis, the pregnancy does not entitle her to eat truma. Which I will say, by the way, if you think about it, if you look at truma as a davar ruchni, what it tells you is something so incredibly profound. It takes much less to lose your ruchnius than it does to acquire your ruchnius. Right? You could lose your ruchnius 1, 2, 3, pretty easy. To acquire ruchnius, right? To acquire spirituality, to acquire truma, so to speak, that takes a lot more effort. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Nimtza lo sochal yolda sochal. But interestingly enough, if the Israel is impregnated by the Kohen, gives birth to a baby, then what? That child enables her to eat truma. Interestingly enough, Nimtza kochal shabein gadol mishal av. The Gemara says sometimes you see that the koach of the son is even greater than the father. Meaning what? That when the Kohen impregnated this woman, so the fact that he got her pregnant does not enable her to eat truma. What does enable her to eat truma? The child that is born. Nimtza koach haben gadol mishal av. So I will say a very profound statement also in terms of ruchnius. I will say sometimes in life, we're waiting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Av, to take action. And what we don't realize is that sometimes at the end of the day, the Ribono Shel Olam is waiting for us to take action. God says, why are you waiting for me? You affect change. Nimtza koach kocho shel bein gadol mikoach shel av. I will say sometimes kiviyachol, the strength of the son, the strength of the Jew, is greater than the strength of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I say kiviyachol because, of course, that's not a literal statement. But sometimes in life, again, we're waiting for God to be the vehicle of change. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to us, I'm waiting for you to be the vehicle of change. Don't underestimate your own koach. Don't underestimate your own power. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Ha'eved posel mishum bia, v'ino posel mishum zera. Rabbi says, interesting case. If an Eved has relations with a woman, those relations, that bia, will preclude her from eating truma, but interestingly enough, does not possible because of offspring. Now, what does that mean? What's the case? Here we go. Really fascinating case. Ketzad, Bas Yisrael a Kohen, right? If a Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen, right? Ubas Kohen li Yisrael. So here's the case. Regular marriage. A Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen, or a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael. Either way, the Yolda Himenu Ben. And Abba said they have a child. They have a child. The Yolda Himenu Ben. Right? Okay. V'halach haben. So we'll say, so just to illustrate this case, right? So either way, Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen, Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael. They have a son. The son v'halach haben v'nichbash ala shivcha. The son has relations with the shivcha. Has relations with the shivcha. V'yalda emen a ben. And now the son has relations with the shivcha. And now what? They have a son. They have a son. So I will say, now listen to this. So I will say, now what's the status of that son? Harei ze eved. The Rabbi say, when the son has a child with a shivcha, the status of that son is, he's an Eved. The Rabbi say, now watch this. Now, here's the Shaila. What's the impact of an Eved grandson upon the grandmothers? That's really our Shaila. Because right, we have two potential grandmothers in this case. Grandmother number one was a Bas Yisrael who married a Kohen. Right? Grandmother number two was a Bas Kohen who married a Yisrael. Now I will say, now watch this. This is incredible. Listen to this. So the Gemara says, Haisa im aviv bas Yisrael. So I will say, if we're dealing with the case ultimately, so I will say, so just to illustrate, let's do this case one at a time. All right. So case number one, Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen. Right. What happens when she marries a Kohen? What could she have? Truma. Okay. They have a son. Beautiful. Son has relations with the shivcha. Now they have what? A son. The Rabbi say, watch this. Let's say son dies, husband dies. So Rabbi say, who's left in the picture over here? Who's left in the picture? Grandma, right? Now what is grandma? Right? Grandma is a Bas Yisrael. Now Rabbi say, now remember again, who was married to a Kohen. Now if grandma Bas Yisrael wants to continue eating truma, what does she need? Offspring. What's the only offspring she has in this case? Right? An Eved grandson. Right, poor woman. Right, this is what my son left. Right. This is what you can hear the speech. Right, you can hear it. Right. So I'm going to say her remaining offspring is an Eved grandson. So watch this. So listen to this. Haisa im aviv bas Yisrael Kohen lo socha b'truma. So I'm going to say in this case, if her only offspring is an Eved grandson, she cannot. Essentially, we'll say having an Eved grandson is the same thing as what? Having no offspring at all. and therefore she cannot go ahead and eat truma. Conversely, Rabbi says, let's go with the other case, where grandma was a Bas Kohen who married a Yisrael. They had a son. Rabbi said, remember, what happens when Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael? What happens when Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael? No more truma, right? They have a son, right? Son has relations with the Shivcha. They have a son. Now what happens? Son died, husband died. The only two remaining relatives in this family are who? Grandma, who's a what? Bas Kohen, and her grandson. What's her status now? She can go back and eat truma in her father's home. Why? Why I will say? Because essentially, she has no remaining offspring. Right? Her husband died, her biological son died, and the only remaining relative is her Eved grandson, who halachically is not her relative. So therefore, again, she is a Bas Kohen who has no longer any level of relationship to her Yisrael husband's family, or to her family also. Therefore, she reverts back to the status of being a Bas Kohen. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Bas Kohen Yisrael, Eim Aviv Bas Yisrael Kohen Lo Socha B'Truma. Bas Kohen Yisrael Tocha B'Truma. Incredible. We'll say those are the two cases. Fascinating. Mamzer Posal Umachil. That was in the case of a mamzer, right, when he has relations with a woman, ultimately, again, is posal umachil. What does that mean? Kate said, here we go. Bas Yisrael Kohen, or Bas Kohen Yisrael. So Rabbi said, listen to this. If a Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen, or a Bas Kohen marries Yisrael, v'yolda hemenu Bas, and they have a child, they have a daughter, one daughter. V'holcha habas v'nises li eved, or li oved kochavim. And Rabbi said, Nebuch, what happens? The only child, the daughter, goes and marries an Eved or a guy, an Eved or an Ovid Kochavim. Now, say remember again. So fine, V'yolda Heimenu Ben. And now what happens? The daughter and her Eved or guy husband have a son. So we'll say, this is what Mishnah, Harei Mamzer. Now, say, this is pretty extreme. The Mishnah is reflecting the view that when you have a child from Chayvei Lavin, that child is a mamzer. Okay, so let's now we don't pass in this way, right? We'll say we pass when a Jewish woman marries an Eved or a guy. What's the status of a child? Jewish through and through. We'll say so again. There's discussions if it's a daughter. There's discussions about a daughter about marrying a Kohen with if she has a non-Jewish father. But again, leaving that aside. But our mission is going with the view that such a child is called a mamzer. Okay, now I'll say, now watch this. Say, here we go. So I'll say, so just keep in mind the family tree. Let's go one case at a time. Haisa'im imo bas Yisrael Kohen tocha b'truma. Now I'll say, now watch this. Let's go through this. So let's go with first case. Case number one was Bas Yisrael married a Kohen. So when she marries a Kohen, what is she entitled to have? Truma. Now she has a daughter. All is good, right? All is good. Daughter marries a guy. Not so good, right? Then what happens? They have a child. The child is a mamzer. Now, boss said, let's go back. Daughter dies, husband dies. Is the Israelis permitted to continue to eat truma? And the answer is yes. Why? Because even though her grandson is a mamzer, nevertheless what? Halach l'mais is Jewish, right? The mamzer is a Jew, and therefore, again, the presence of Jewish offspring enables her to continue to eat truma. Right? Tocha b'truma. Conversely, Rabbi says, go backwards. Right? Let's say grandma was a Bas Kohen who married a Yisrael. They then have a daughter, right? Fine. So remember, when Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael, what happens to her? No more truma for her. They now have a daughter. Daughter marries a guy. They have a child. Child's a mamzer. Now what happens? Daughter dies. Husband dies. Who's left in the family? So Bas Kohen grandma together with mamzer grandson. Could she eat truma? No. Why? Because she has remaining offspring from her Yisrael husband. So we'll say it's the same case. Same exact thing. In other words, what we do is the nature and quality of the offspring has a dramatic impact on grandma. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Kohen Gadol Pam Mishu Posa. Listen to this. We'll say, this is actually this is such a great case. Kohen Gadol, listen to this. I will say, so we just spoke about a case where your grandchild is a mamzer. It happens. Right? Now, listen to this. I will say, there are times where even your grandson could be the Kohen Gadol, and it could still preclude grandma from eating truma. Watch this. This is so great. So Kohen Gadol Pamishu Posa. Listen to this. Sometimes a Kohen Gadol could preclude his grandmother from eating truma. How could that happen? Ketzad Bas Kohen Yisrael v'Yadahem Enu Bas. So we'll say, here's the case. A Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael. It's fine, no problem. They have a daughter. V'halcha habas v'niseis leKohen. And then the daughter went ahead and married a Kohen. V'Yadahem Enu Ben. And then they have a son. Hareza Roi Lios Kohen Gadol. Omeidu Misham Shekaveh Mizbeach. Machilas imo, uposalas aim imo. So what's the tell you this case outside? This is great. It's great. Listen to this. Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael. Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael. Fine. What happens when a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael? What happens? She can't eat truma. Can't eat truma. Okay, fine. Legitimate marriage, everything is good. They have a daughter. Mazel tov. Daughter marries a Kohen. Daughter marries a Kohen. I tell all my girls, by the way, I want one of my girls to marry a Kohen. My greatest wish in life is to be a Kohen. It's not going to happen. I still have a hope, it's still a possibility for Kohanic grandsons. So I tell my daughters, no pressure, but it's the only thing I want in life, right? No pressure, but it's the only thing. But whatever, it's fine. It's not a big deal. I'll say, so here's what happens over here. So what happens? So I will say, so now, what ends up happening? So now, Kohenes, right? Bas Kohen marries Yisrael. No truma for her. Fine. They have a daughter. Mazel tov. Daughter marries a Kohen. Mazel tov. And now what happens? We'll say, watch this. Now let's say daughter marries a Kohen. They have a son. This son, Gadol Shebigdolim and Mamish, he's the Kohen Gadol. Now watch what happens. Daughter passes away. Husband passes away. And so the only two people left in the family are who? Right? Grandma, Bas Kohen, and grandson Kohen Gadol. Guess what, Rabbi say? Grandson Kohen Gadol prevents grandma, Bas Kohen, from eating truma. Why? Because remember again, Kohen Gadol grandson is the remnant of the offspring of her marriage to her Yisrael husband. And as long as there is biological offspring from her marriage to her Yisrael husband, she is precluded, quote unquote, from going back to her father's home and eating truma. So it says, wow, by the way, this is a good Shabbos table discussion, right? So you could have a case of a Bas Kohen grandmother with a Kohen Gadol grandson who is not permitted to eat truma. Because again, the Kohen Gadol grandson is the offspring of her marriage to her Yisrael husband. She and her Yisrael husband have a daughter. This is the daughter's son. This grandson is the Kohen Gadol. It's true. But he's the grandson, he's the offspring of her marriage to the Yisrael, which precludes her from eating truma. Wild. To which the Gemara will say, this is incredible. Zoso meres. This is what people sometimes say. Lo kibnei Kohen Gadol shu posani minat truma. Anything but a son who's a Kohen Gadol who prevents me from eating truma. I guess it flows better in the Hebrew than it does in the English, right? So I'll say, so what it's saying is, which is also fascinating, I'll say that sometimes everybody wants nachas from their children, but we also want personal happiness as well. So I'll say, so sometimes when my nachas conflicts with my personal, right? There's an expression. I shouldn't have offspring like a Kohen Gadol who prevents me from eating truma. Okay. Well, say just an interesting case. Let's go back. It says the Gemara, Tanina. Let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that Allah Lamaisa, and I will say a shota. So let's say, for example, a shota, right? Let's say a Kohen who is a shota. So a Kohen who lacks mental capacity marries a woman. Chuppah, kiddushin. So the Mishnah said that chuppah and kiddushin with a shota does not allow her to eat truma. Why not? Because it's not a valid chuppah and kiddushin. Why? Because he lacks capacity. So we'll say first white line. Shota v'katan shenasu nashu mesu nishoseim peturos min chalitza min hayibum. We'll say we've already learned this, that a shota and a katan who affect marriage, and then let's say they die without children, their wives are not subject to human chalitza. Why are their wives not subject to human chalitza? Why? Because there was no marriage. So the same way that they're not subject to human chalitza, the same idea is that halacha l'maisa, if the shota or the katan is a Kohen, they were not entitled their wives to truma with this marriage. Incredible. Keitzad hayi yisrael sheba abbas kohen tocha b'truma ibra lo tocha. So we'll say, here we go. Remember again the second case of the Mishnah. If a Yisrael has relations with a bas Kohen. We'll say not married, she has relations with her. So again, if she becomes pregnant, then halacha lamai, I'm sorry, this was a Yisrael who has relations with a bas Kohen, right? If she becomes pregnant, she's not permitted to eat truma. Now again, there are two possibilities. If she miscarries, then what's the halacha? She could go back to eating truma. If she gives birth to a viable baby, then halacha lamaisa, she's precluded from eating truma. So the Gemara says, Kevan de Ibra lo seichel. So now that you told me that halacha lamaisa, once she becomes pregnant, she can't eat truma. Lechush shema Ibra. Rabbi say, now here's what's interesting. So the way this sounds is like this. Let's play this out. Yisrael has relations with the bas Kohen. So what did we say? If halacha l'maisa she becomes pregnant, then halacha l'maisa she's not permitted to eat truma. So it sounds like when is she not permitted to eat truma as of? From the moment that what? We know she's pregnant. Which sounds like from the time of the act of relations until we know that she's pregnant, she can eat truma. To which the Gemara says, but why? Why aren't we choshesh leichosh? Why do we say right after relations she should not be permitted to eat truma out of concern that maybe she's pregnant? Milotna, did we not learn? Mafrishin osan gimel chadashim. Remember again, we had this interesting case. This was the case where ultimately two couples got married and there was a mix-up at the chuppah. It happens, right? It happens, mix-up, right? And we're not sure who lived with who. So Rabbi says, so what has to happen? Everybody needs to separate from relations for 3 months in order to be able to ascertain if anyone's pregnant and who they're pregnant from. So we see a precedent for being, in other words, we don't say, it was just one act of relations, maybe they're not pregnant, right? So we see that even after one act of relations occurs, we have to be concerned for pregnancy. So why don't we say that halacha l'maisa, right after this Kohen has relations with right after the Yisrael has relations with the bas Kohen, she can't eat truma as of when? As of now, and we're going to wait to see if she's pregnant. To which the Gemara says, liyuchsin chashashu, letruma lo chashashu. I will say for yuchsin, in other words, in terms of establishing paternity, that's where we're machmir. For truma, we're not machmir. And I will say what that means is for truma, we don't assume a woman is pregnant until when? Until we know she's pregnant. So the Gemara says, truma lo chashashu, is that true? That Allah for truma, we're not choshesh for pregnancy right after the biyah? Vatanya, we learned, if a man says to a woman, I'm giving you a get, and it should be retroactively valid 1 moment before my death. Then Rabbi say, why would someone give a get like this to his wife? Right? Why? He wants to avoid yibum. So Rabbi say, what he wants is he puts in a retroactivity clause that essentially says, this is your get, and I'm giving it to you now, but it's only valid 1 moment before my death. So when he dies, the get is retroactively valid and ultimately, again, saves her from yibum. To which Moshe Chaim said, but if you give a get like that, asura le'echol b'truma miyad. Rabbi say, halacha l'maisi, here's what's interesting. It works, but there's an interesting byproduct or repercussion, which is she can't eat truma. Rabbi say, why can't she eat truma? Because he could die any minute. So Rabbi said, when she's chomping down on truma now, it could be he dies the next moment. Retroactively, she has a get. If she's a grusha, if she's a divorcee, she's not permitted to eat truma. So halacha l'maisa again. So Rabbi said, what do you see? Now, what do you see from this? You see from this that we are choshesh for things, right? We are choshesh for change in status. To which the Gemara says, Ela amar ra bar Huna b'nisuin. Rashi is the chol shaita minan hashtamayis alma asri la misafek. We'll say the idea is we prevent her from eating truma in that case because we're concerned that maybe he's going to die. In other words, that we asr truma consumption because of safek. So too over here, when the bas Kohen had relations with the Yisrael, we should tell her you can't eat truma now. Already starting now, safek maybe you're pregnant. So Allah amar Rabba bar Huna b'nisuin chashashu b'zinus lo chashashu. Rabbi said this is very interesting. The truth is, Chazal were only choshesh in a case of marriage, weren't choshesh in a case of znus. Why, Rabbi say? This is actually very interesting. When the woman engages in an act of snus, we assume that she takes certain contraceptive measures in order to prevent becoming pregnant. So I will say, whether that's the usage of a moch, which is like some type of barrier, absorbent cloth, or ultimately, again, we've seen that at least the Talmudic form of contraception was gravity, right? Going ahead and jumping up and down after bia, so that lamaisa, again, the zera, the semen, does not take root. So the idea being is, we assume that if a woman is going to engage in active znus, she's also taking steps afterwards to not become pregnant. And therefore, they don't have to be choshesh that she's pregnant after bia, unless what? Or until when? Until we know that she is pregnant. So the Gemara and ultimately, I will say, so now what's interesting about this answer is we assume that in marriage, we assume that after bia, there's the immediate potential pregnancy. Is that true? The Yona Shushie Ehrenfeld was listen to this case. Bas Kohen sheni says li Yisrael umeis. If a Bas Kohen married a Yisrael, she married a Yisrael. Ultimately, so also remember again, when she marries a Yisrael, what happens to her truma consumption? What happens? Done, right? It's done. Now what happens? He dies. Now her husband died, and no offspring. So Rabbi say, what's talacha? Tovelas, she goes to the mikvah. Va'ocheles b'truma la'erev, and she could eat truma that night. Then I both say, based on this, what are we not concerned about? Why are we concerned that she's pregnant from her husband? Always say she has to go to the mikvah, and she could eat truma that night. So this is the case of marriage. You see, even in marriage, we're not choshesh for pregnancy. Vatanya, we learned, Baskai, Amar Achista, Toveles va'ocheles ad arboim. Listen to this. Rav Chisda says, the truth is, she could go ahead and go to the mikvah and eat truma as long as we are within 40 days of her active relations with her husband. Why did I both say? Di'i lo ma'abra, halo ma'abra. Because we will say during the first 40 days after bia, there's one of two possibilities. Either she's not pregnant. If she's not pregnant, she's not pregnant. Vi'i ma'abra ad arboim ma'i ba'almahi. Wow. They both say the halachic view of pregnancy is that for the first 40 days of pregnancy, the pregnancy is nothing. The pregnancy is maya ba'alma, is ultimately just water. Just water. It is not considered, which I will say is incredibly profound. I will just tell you, this is not our topic for now. But I will say one of the interesting things, one of the, there's something called the morning after pill, right? And the morning after pill, kishmo kinhu, is a pill that one could take that if there is any type of fertilization that took place so I will say, interestingly enough, again, it's a much more informed discussion, but it's fascinating to see that halacha allows for many, many, many things within the first 40 days of pregnancy that often become halachically impossible after the first 40 days of pregnancy. So we'll say, the Gemara says like this, we're talking about the first 40 days. So ultimately, we'll say, in other words, the easiest way to illustrate this was, let's say, for example, Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael. Right? So wedding night, he dies the next morning. So I will say, in a case like this, we say, okay, go to the mikvah, eat truma, go back to your father's home, eat truma. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. What's going to happen, right? If she's not pregnant, she's not pregnant. If she is pregnant, so if she is pregnant, then for the first 40 days anyway, it's just water. It's nothing. And therefore, again, there would be no problem for her to go ahead and eat truma. Now, once we know she becomes pregnant, then Einach Inami, she would have to stop eating truma. Amar le Abai says, Ihachi, if that's the case, so I'll say, but Abai said, if that's the case, but then, I will say, in that case, when she becomes pregnant, doesn't it turn out that she was a pregnant Bas Kohen who from Yisrael who's eating truma all of this time, and she should become liable lemafreya? Now, what does lemafreya mean? Doesn't lemafreya mean all the way back to a first act of bia? No. My mikol keles ad arboim. Ultimately, again, it means mikol keles up until 40 days. In other words, I will say that for the first 40 days, halacha l'maisa, we don't view it as a pregnancy. So even if there is some level of liability, at most the liability extends back to day 41 and not any further than that. I will say, we'll stop over here for today. But I will say again, what you begin to see is something incredibly amazing. That halacha l'maisa, this case, just you see, that in the case of znus, we're not choshesh for pregnancy. That's what's really coming down over here. Because I will say, this is why, in the case of a Bas Kohen, ultimately, again, who has relations with the Yisrael, ultimately, after the act of relations, halacha l'maisa, she's permitted to eat truma. The only time she's not permitted to eat truma is when we know she's pregnant. And so if she's not pregnant, she can eat truma. If we know she becomes pregnant, at that point in time, her truma window closes. Rabbi Elys will continue with this sugya tomorrow. Shkoyach. Another exciting week ahead of us.